It was a quiet Thursday night in a small town, the kind where nothing ever seems to happen. The streets are usually deserted by 9 p.m., and the only sounds are the distant hum of old streetlights flickering on and off. I never had any reason to fear the place, until last night. I was at Mike's house, an old friend I hadn't seen in months. We used to go out on weekends, grab a few drinks, but lately he'd been distant, buried in work. When he called me for drinks, I figured he needed to vent. I didn't realize how dark the night would get. By the time I arrived, Mike was already deep into a bottle, and I could see it in his eyes. Something was weighing on him. After a few awkward sips, I asked him what was going on. He looked around nervously, making sure we were alone, and then he leaned in close. "It's work," he said, voice low. I'm seeing things. Things I can't explain." Mike worked in the city's tech department, overseeing the CCTV network. He designed a program to filter out anomalies. Anything strange caught on camera was flagged for review. Most of it was harmless, everyday stuff, but there was a special archive, a hidden one. He called it the Tartarus Archive. "You ever hear of Tartarus?" he asked, eyes darting toward the window. "It's like hell but worse. It's where the worst of the worst go, the ones not even fit for hell." I didn't know where this was going, but the way his hands trembled as he took another sip had me hooked. He pulled out a hard drive and plugged it into his computer. "I shouldn't be showing you this," he said. "But I need someone else to see. Someone who'll believe me." The footage started playing on the screen. It was grainy, black and white, but you could tell it was real. It showed a woman walking down Lincoln Avenue, one of the town's main streets. She looked over her shoulder, panicked, and started running. But there was no one behind her. No one visible, anyway. Then, something strange happened. The woman tripped and fell in the middle of the street, but before she could get up, her body lifted into the air, like someone or something had grabbed her by the throat. Her head jerked unnaturally to the side, and then, she dropped lifeless to the ground. "That's not the worst of it," Mike said, his voice shaking. "Watch this." He clicked to the next video. The footage was from the subway, one of the older, rarely used stations on the edge of town. The platform was empty, dark, except for one of the cameras still running on night vision. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a glitch, but then I saw it, something crawling out of the shadows. It was human-shaped but wrong. It moved on all fours, its back bent unnaturally, like it had been broken and healed wrong. Its hair was long, matted, dragging across the platform as it skittered toward the stairs. I felt my stomach turn. "What the hell is that?" "People call it the crab walker," Mike said. "It's been seen down there for years. The cops say it's just some homeless guy, but it's not. Watch this." The footage switched to the outside of the station. The creature crawled up the stairs and squeezed through the locked gate with a grotesque ease, like its bones could bend in ways no human should. Once outside, it scurried into the woods near the station. An hour later it returned, dragging something by its teeth, a small animal, maybe a cat. The video cut off, but Mike wasn't done. He pulled up another file, something labeled Cloud Mirror. "This is the one that's been keeping me up at night," he said. The screen flickered to life again, showing multiple intersections downtown, all deserted in the dead of night. At first, it looked like nothing was happening, but then in each intersection, a small orb of light appeared, pulsing and growing until it was the size of a beach ball. The streetlights around it flickered violently, like they were reacting to it. And then the orb exploded into a swirling cloud of dark gas, like smoke but denser, more alive. It floated down the street, turning corners as if it knew exactly where it was going. "Now watch this," Mike whispered, his voice barely audible. On one of the screens, a group of people appeared, walking down the street, clearly drunk. They saw the cloud and, as if in a trance, walked right into it. One by one, they disappeared into the swirling darkness, and then, they came back out. But they weren't the same. Their movements were stiff, robotic, their eyes blank, emotionless. They spread out, walking in perfect unison in different directions, vanishing into the night. I sat back in my chair, my skin crawling. "What the hell is this, Mike?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes were glued to the screen, to the footage of the cloud hovering in the street. "It's not just the cameras," he finally said. "It's real. It's out there. And it's getting closer." Just as the words left his mouth, the lights in the room flickered. The lights in the room flickered once, twice, then cut out completely. Mike's face was bathed in the glow from his computer screens, his eyes wide with a fear I'd never seen in him before. The air in the room grew heavier, as if something unseen was pressing down on us. I stood up, knocking over my drink. "What the hell, Mike? Is this some kind of joke?" He didn't even flinch. He just stared past me, toward the window, his voice barely a whisper. "It's here. I turned slowly, feeling the weight of his words sink into my gut. The window faced the main road, and through the curtains, I could just make out the streetlights beyond. They were flickering erratically, like they did in the footage. I swallowed hard. "Mike, what's here? What are you talking about?" Without answering, he grabbed his phone, his fingers trembling as he typed something in. He held it up to me, showing me the CCTV feed from outside his house. And there it was. The cloud. The same swirling mass from the videos, only now it wasn't on some grainy footage, it was right outside. It hovered at the end of the street, a pulsating mass of darkness, growing larger with every flicker of the streetlights. I felt my blood turn to ice. "Mike, what the hell is that thing?" "I don't know," he muttered, backing away from the window. "I've been watching it for weeks now. It's getting closer every night. But tonight it's here. It's outside my house." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The cloud was real? This wasn't just some glitch in the camera system or a drunken hallucination. Whatever it was real, and it was coming for us. "We have to go," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We can't stay here." Mike shook his head. "It doesn't matter where we go. You don't get it. Once it sees you, it never stops." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean?" He clicked on another video file, this one labeled Echo Hollow, and the footage showed a family, a mom, a dad, and their young son, standing in their backyard. They were laughing, playing, completely unaware of the cloud hovering just beyond their fence. And then, in an instant, the cloud moved. It floated over the fence, creeping toward them like a predator stalking its prey. The mom turned, her smile freezing as she saw it. She screamed, but it was too late. The cloud engulfed them, swallowing them whole. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. The family was left standing there, but they weren't the same. Their bodies twitched unnaturally, their eyes vacant, and they walked in unison, back into their house. The screen flickered, and the video cut out. "That was 3 weeks ago," Mike whispered. "I've been tracking it ever since. It takes people, changes them. And now it's here." I couldn't think. My mind raced, trying to find some explanation, some way out of this. But deep down, I knew there was nothing we could do. Whatever this thing was, it was unstoppable. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the house, shaking the walls. Mike's eyes widened in terror. "It's inside." I grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door. "We need to get out now." But before we could move, the lights came back on, blinding us for a split second. And in that moment, I saw it. Standing in the doorway to the living room, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure. It looked human, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its posture twisted and unnatural, like it had been broken and put back together in all the wrong ways. And its eyes. God, its eyes were empty, hollow, like it wasn't even alive. It took a step forward, and the air grew colder, freezing me in place. "Mike," I whispered, my voice trembling. What is that?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at the figure, his face pale as death. The figure took another step forward, and then another, until it was standing right in front of us. I could feel the cold radiating off it, seeping into my bones. And then, without warning, it lunged. I grabbed Mike and ran, dragging him with me as we bolted for the front door. We stumbled out into the night, gasping for breath, but the cloud was waiting for us. It hovered at the edge of the driveway, its dark mass swirling and pulsing, and I could hear whispers. Faint, indecipherable voices coming from inside it, like a chorus of the damned. I turned to Mike, panic flooding my senses. What do we do? How do we stop it? But Mike was already gone. His eyes were glazed over, staring blankly at the cloud as he took a step toward it. "Mike, no!" I shouted, but it was too late. The cloud engulfed him, swallowing him whole, just like in the footage. And then, nothing. The cloud dissipated, evaporating into the night, and Mike was gone. I stood there alone, my heart pounding in my chest, wondering if I'd be next. But the cloud didn't return. I don't know why it spared me. Maybe it was because I wasn't the one it had marked. Maybe I'd just gotten lucky. But now, every night, I watch the streets, waiting for the lights to flicker, waiting for the cloud to come back. Because I know it's out there. And one day, it will come for me too. The days after Mike disappeared were the worst of my life. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that cloud, its dark, swirling mass, the way it consumed him like he was nothing more than a passing thought. I couldn't get the whispers out of my head either, the voices from within it, like distant screams buried under layers of static. Sleep became impossible. Every flicker of a streetlight, every strange shadow out of the corner of my eye sent me into a full-blown panic. I couldn't stay at my place. It was too close to Mike's house, too close to where it had happened. So, I packed up a bag and decided to stay at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a dingy room with peeling wallpaper and a musty smell, but I figured it would be far enough from the main streets, away from the places the cloud had been seen. The first couple of nights were quiet. Uneasy, but quiet. I kept to myself, hardly left the room, and obsessively checked the CCTV feeds that Mike had shown me. I'd hacked into the city's surveillance system using the password Mike had given me that night, and I'd been watching it ever since. My eyes scanned every intersection, every street corner, searching for any sign of that dark mass. On the third night, around 2 a.m., I saw it again. I had been nodding off in front of my laptop, fighting the exhaustion that had been gnawing at me for days, when one of the feeds flickered. It was Lincoln Avenue again, the same place where Mike had shown me the first video. The street was empty, as always, the only movement coming from the occasional flutter of trash in the wind. Then the lights started to flicker. I straightened up in my chair, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched the camera zoom in. The cloud appeared out of nowhere, materializing in the middle of the street, slowly expanding like it was feeding on the electricity around it. It was larger now, more defined. And I could see shapes inside it. Human shapes. Suddenly, a figure stumbled into frame. A man clearly drunk, weaving from side to side as he walked down the street. He didn't seem to notice the cloud at first, just kept walking like he was lost in his own world. But as he got closer, his steps faltered. He stopped, staring at the cloud, his head tilting to the side as if he couldn't quite understand what he was seeing. And then, just like the people in the other footage, he walked straight into it. The cloud swallowed him whole, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the whispers began again, louder this time, clearer. I could almost make out words, but not quite, like they were just beyond the edge of comprehension. And then, the man walked out. But he wasn't the same. His movements were stiff, mechanical, like every joint in his body had locked up. His face was blank, his eyes wide and empty, and he walked with an eerie precision down the street, disappearing into the darkness. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling. This was real. It was happening again. And I had no idea how to stop it. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear and restless pacing. I couldn't stay in that room anymore. I couldn't stay anywhere. It was coming for me. I was sure of it. By morning, I made up my mind. I needed answers. I needed to know what this thing was, and why it had taken Mike, why it was taking people. There had to be a reason, something I was missing. I went to the only place I thought might have answers, the city archives. If there was any record of strange occurrences, of disappearances or unexplained events, it would be there. Maybe there were others like Mike, other people who had seen the cloud, who had survived. The archive building was an old, decaying structure in the heart of downtown, a relic of a town that hadn't changed in decades. I walked through the dusty aisles of old newspaper clippings and microfilm, feeling like I was being watched with every step. After hours of searching, I found it. An article from the 1960s, buried deep in the microfilm archives. The headline read, "Mysterious Disappearances Plague Lincoln Avenue, 6 Missing in 2 Weeks." My heart raced as I read the details. 6 people had vanished without a trace in the span of 2 weeks, all last seen on Lincoln Avenue. Their bodies were never found. The article mentioned that local authorities had chalked it up to some kind of crime spree, but there were no suspects, no clues. The disappearances stopped just as suddenly as they had started. I flipped through more articles, finding more reports of strange lights in the sky, of people disappearing in broad daylight, only to reappear days later changed, just like the man in the footage. And then, the most chilling article of all. 1967, black fog descends on town. Residents warned to stay indoors. The description was eerily similar to the cloud I'd seen, an unnatural black fog that seemed to have a mind of its own, swallowing up everything in its path. The fog was blamed for a series of deaths in the area, and the town had declared a state of emergency for weeks, though there were no official reports afterward. It was as if they'd covered it up. My heart sank as I realized this thing had been here before. Decades ago, it had taken people. And now it was back. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. There had to be a connection. There had to be a way to stop it. But how? Then I saw it. On the bottom of one of the articles, barely noticeable, was a name, David Fletcher. He had been the only person to survive an encounter with the fog, though no one had believed him. He was labeled a drunk, a vagrant. But he had been right. I had to find him. I grabbed my things and rushed out of the archive, my heart pounding. If Fletcher was still alive, he was my only hope. He knew what this thing was. He had survived. I just hoped I could find him before the cloud found me. That night, as I lay in the motel room, staring at the ceiling, I heard it.
A whisper.
It was faint at first, just a trickle of sound at the edge of my consciousness. But then it grew louder, more insistent. I sat up, my heart pounding, straining to hear. It was coming from outside. I moved to the window, my breath caught in my throat, and slowly pulled back the curtain. And there, at the edge of the parking lot, hovering in the pale glow of the flickering streetlight, was the cloud. It had found me. The cloud hovered at the edge of the parking lot, swirling, dark, and alive. It didn't move closer, but I could feel it watching me, if something like that could even watch. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, like hundreds of voices speaking all at once, all of them saying my name. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of that room and as far away from the cloud as possible. But where would I go? It had followed me here, tracked me down like it had Mike. I was trapped. The phone rang, cutting through the whispers. I jumped, nearly knocking over the lamp on the nightstand. With shaking hands, I grabbed the receiver.
Hello.
There was silence on the other end. For a moment, I thought it might just be another hallucination, a trick of my frazzled nerves. But then, a voice came through, soft, almost a whisper itself. It's too late, you know.
My stomach twisted. Who is this?
You've seen it. That means it's seen you. The voice was calm, too calm, like they were telling me something inevitable, something I could do nothing to change. My pulse quickened, fear creeping up my spine. Who are you? I demanded, my voice trembling. You've been looking for me, haven't you? The voice said.
I'm David Fletcher.
I nearly dropped the phone.
Fletcher.
The man from the articles, the only one who had survived the cloud all those years ago.
I gripped the phone tighter. How do I stop it?
Please, you have to tell me. I begged, my voice cracking. There was a long pause on the other end. When Fletcher spoke again, his voice was a barely audible whisper, like he was afraid someone might hear.
You can't stop it, he said. It doesn't want to be stopped. All you can do is run.
But even that's not enough. I felt a chill run down my spine.
What do you mean? Why me? Why Mike? It marks people, Fletcher said.
It doesn't matter why. Once you've seen it, it's already chosen you. It feeds on fear, on despair. You can't hide from it. I opened my mouth to ask more, to demand answers, but the phone line went dead. The sudden silence was deafening, and the whispers outside seemed to grow louder, as if the cloud knew I was out of time. I turned back to the window, my breath shallow, and froze. The cloud was closer now, just beyond the motel's parking lot, shifting and pulsing like a living thing. Shadows moved within it, shapes that barely resembled people.
And then, one by one, they started to step out. They looked human, at least at first.
But their movements were wrong, jerky, unnatural, like puppets with broken strings. Their eyes were hollow, just like the man I'd seen in the CCTV footage. And they were walking toward me. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking. This wasn't just a cloud.
It was something far worse, something ancient.
Something hungry.
I couldn't stay here.
I couldn't let it take me. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and bolted for the door. As soon as I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap in the face, but I didn't stop. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, my heart racing as the shadows inched closer. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, wrapping around my mind like chains, pulling me toward the cloud. I slammed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and tore out of the parking lot, tires screeching against the asphalt. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just needed to get as far away from that thing as possible. The road stretched out ahead of me, dark and empty. The motel disappeared in my rearview mirror, swallowed by the night. But no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still following me, lurking just beyond the edge of the headlights. I didn't stop until I reached the outskirts of town, where the buildings thinned out and the forest loomed dark and foreboding on either side of the road. I pulled over, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I was breathing hard, my heart pounding in my chest.
For a moment, there was silence. No whispers, no cloud.
Just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the wind rustling through the trees. Maybe I'd outrun it. But then I saw them. In the middle of the road, barely visible in the moonlight, stood the figures. The ones that had stepped out of the cloud. They were just standing there, watching me.
Waiting.
I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. How had they gotten here so fast? I'd driven miles. There was no way they could have followed me. But there they were, as if they had always been there. And then, slowly, they started to move toward the car. Panic surged through me, and I slammed the car into reverse, backing away as fast as I could. But the figures kept coming, their hollow eyes locked on me, their movements slow and deliberate. They weren't in a hurry. They knew I had nowhere to go. I glanced into the rearview mirror, and my blood turned to ice. The cloud was behind me. It was larger now, so large it blocked out the road, the trees, the sky. It pulsed and shifted, its dark mass writhing like a living thing, and the whispers were so loud now that I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. I was surrounded. The figures were closing in from the front, and the cloud loomed behind me, swallowing the road. There was no escape. My mind raced, grasping at anything, any idea, any way out. But Fletcher's words echoed in my head, "You can't stop it. It doesn't want to be stopped." I felt the cold creeping into the car, felt the whispers wrapping around me like tendrils, pulling me toward the cloud. And then, in the rearview mirror, I saw Mike. He was standing just inside the cloud, his face pale, his eyes hollow, staring at me with that same vacant, lifeless expression. "No," I whispered, tears streaming down my face.
No, no, no.
But it was too late.
The cloud surged forward, engulfing the car, and the whispers became deafening, filling my mind, drowning out everything else. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was standing in the middle of the road. The sun was rising, casting a soft glow over the trees.
The car was gone. The cloud was gone. The figures were gone.
I looked down at my hands, and they were shaking. I didn't know how long I had been standing there.
Hours? Days?
But I knew one thing for sure.
It wasn't over.
The cloud had marked me, just like it had marked Mike. And no matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, it would always find me. I started walking down the road, my body moving on autopilot, my mind numb.
Because I knew.
One day, it would come back.
And this time, I wouldn't escape.